I promise. Look, I don't like anime. I don't understand the appeal. If like
9-tailed fox isn't from anime.
I don't care. It's whatever. All right. Hey, today is September the 18th, and we're going over chapters 23 and 24. For those of you who are in here now, I've put some things up on the board. What did monasteries have? What's the life of a monk like? Boniface, Cyril and Methodius, and stability. So I'm going to give you, who are here, a few minutes to talk about these things with your neighbor. So I gotta change the time on my timer.
Don't forget to start the timer.
I started it. I think I must have accidentally turned it off because a couple of seconds ticked off. So when I set it down, I probably touched the screen. All right, so talk to your neighbor.
Dig it in. Give him.
Yeah, I have like 6 of those.
6 of them. What you do, Rob?
See the air go wrong.
No, that was unusual. These are really tough. They've lasted a long time. Well, lasted about 6 years.
Wrong.
Did you see it?
It's not function.
It's hard.
He's got a
It's
stuck up his throat.
What? Oh, it's the baby hairs for me.
Okay, who's got hairspray?
No, not me. I have no hair.
Kelly?
Boy, your hair is smelling stiff hair.
Hey folks. Hey guys and gals. These topics, please discuss these with your neighbors. This is table talk time.
My neighbor.
You like to make a new neighbor.
Look what she did to me.
Right, Hunter?
Talk to the Shelby or
Hi, Hunter.
Hi, Kelton.
Radish.
Monks. And I can find my
That's all.
Wait, try to tell me my baby hair.
It cracks open my hand sometimes really long. Nice attention to detail.
No.
Great attention to detail. That's not I can do it.
Oh my gosh.
I do love it. I'm gonna make her later. It's the hand for me.
I can't draw hands.
Weird. Your
Oh
hand.
my lord.
Oh.
You should have seen it.
I can't show you, but.
Here,
Ashley's hand. Her first hand looked like a real hand. I was like,
Wait, you look at my baby hair.
Wow.
I
What?
quit. I
Ashley,
literally.
Yeah.
Ashley's hand.
we all know Ashley's better than us. We can never compare to Ashley.
I got home hands for 2 years.
When I'm so surprised, like, she can literally do so much, and I'm like, what the heck? Like, I'm amazed by her.
What do you want for your birthday?
Boniface. Sounds like it would be like an hour.
It's her birthday next year.
I did.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
About a minute and a half left.
Well, this is awkward.
Is that, are those
Right.
people up there on the ridge?
Yeah, but you don't have to make me anything.
I can't tell. It might be.
What was that picture?
Like
I
nine,
definitely said those.
No, I'm trying to remember. This picture was taken either right at the end of World War I or more likely World War II. So like a lot of monasteries and stuff like that were destroyed in the World Wars. It's like usually, one power or the other would use them as a base since, they have fortified walls and stuff. So they get bombed. So, but because of that, we lost a lot of ancient buildings and artwork and stuff. I mean,
Yeah, and they also lost half of Germany.
wow, yeah.
I mean, it's not that important. Still
No, this is in Italy. This is in Italy.
It's only Italy.
And there was a lot of fighting in Italy.
my great
Because we
grandpa,
took Italy before we took Germany.
That makes sense.
my great grandpa
They
was
just kind of started.
taken prisoner
Oh,
Really?
in the war.
Oh man. Yeah, that's supposed
He
to
was
be
in a
brutal
German
fighting.
prison camp for two years. Almost.
That's crazy. Yeah, I read a book last spring about paratroopers and army rangers in Italy. It's crazy. When I was there, I actually met a guy. He's an old guy who was actually part of the Italians that tried to fight Mussolini, who was the dictator. He was the fascist guy there. and him and some of his friends, they do like street fighting and all kinds of stuff. They're just wearing like normal street clothes. They have machine guns and stuff like that, shooting at the fascists. It's crazy. Hey, so yeah, a lot of Italians were on our side, even though their government wasn't. So hey, folks, let's go ahead and begin. So yes, I forgot where I got this picture from, but yeah, this is the ruins of a medieval monastery that was bombed after one of the world wars. I think the second one. You can see the trees are burnt out, the buildings are caved in, stuff like that. Those might be people on the ledge there. I can't quite tell.
They are.
It's really old in a grainy photo, but the thing is the world wars really did a lot to Europe. I mean, those like years of fighting. So moving on, here's a layout of a typical monastery. So as you've read, monasteries were like small walled communities that were self-sufficient. Of course, they had the church because, I mean, it was a religious institution with religious people. You had the dorms, you had pigsties. So they, pork was a cheap, easily to grow meat. Stables. They had a blacksmith. They usually had their own winery or brewery. They often would have their own place to grind grain. They usually, if they could, they would have farms and orchards and stuff like that around them. So a lot of this was stored for charity, but some of it was also stored so they could sell it, so that they could buy things that they couldn't make themselves. I think I should know that. I don't know what that is. Let me look it up, because that's a good point. It's a Latin word. I remember that. But
You were the Latin teacher.
yeah, but I mean, I don't always remember it. If you don't use it, you kind of forget it. I mean, if I see a sentence, I can usually piece it together.
Like this half of America.
Oh, it's kind of like I think it's kind of like the place where they go for safety. It's kind of like a fort. Yeah. So something to keep in mind though is that, so remember, like the cloister was kind of like their garden area, kind of like their forum. Their church is shaped like a cross. It's very typical for early Roman and medieval churches. And of course, they had their times of the day when they would have certain duties that performed. They would have to do their prayers. So if you'll recall, these were called the sacred offices, right? And the first one was matins, and you had the last one here, the compline. So like I told you before, monks, part of their job was not only to do things like acts of charity and missionary work and education. It was also to pray for Europe, for their king, for their church. So they were essentially trying to pray for blessings on the people around. Later on, not so much early on, but later on, you're even going to have where people are going to pay monks to pray for them and stuff like that. So this was seen as something that people saw as very efficacious. All right, so during the time of Charles Martel, before Charlemagne, you had this guy here, Boniface. So during the time of the Franks, especially during Charlemagne's time, you had a lot of stories of missionaries who would go to Woden worshippers, right? And they would go to their places, these Celtic religious practices, and they would preach Christianity over the paganism. And this was a time of idol smashing and stuff like that. So usually the missionaries, they would go up and they would challenge the power of the pagan gods. They say, if your gods are so powerful, have them do X, Y, and Z. And so they would challenge them to certain things like debates Or they would say if Thor is so powerful, he can strike me down after I knock down his altar. And so they'd knock down the pagan altars, and the pagans would just expect the sky to explode. And when the sky didn't explode, they'd be like, oh, oops. The story of Boniface is that he came up to, they've had more than one of these, but they had one thing that Celtic people found very sacred was certain ancient trees. And so Boniface goes up to one of these where they held sacrifices. And so the one that he walked up on is the pagan priest would use a stone hammer to sacrifice babies. And so he came up, and the story goes as he snatched the hammer out of his hand, or another story says he actually broke the hammer, took the baby off the altar, and began chopping down the sacred tree, and then used that tree to make a church. And the pagans watching this were so mystified that he was able to do this and not get struck down by Odin, that the story goes a lot of them accepted Christianity right there. And so this is very similar to other conversion stories you might find like in other parts of the world where the old pagan idols were challenged, and when nothing happens, like, oh, okay. Because, if you remember from your story, a lot of these peasants were very literal in their beliefs. If you remember, like with the moon, they would like shout at the moon in some places to try to make sure it would come back and be safe and stuff like that. So, yeah. All right. So there's Boniface, and there's Thor with his little goat-driven chariot running around with his hammer, Mjolnir.
That's a really small camera.
That's how you're.
Well, yeah, this is like a late painting though on the right, and so
Gold was a monastery.
the thing is though about like Wodenism is like it wasn't quite set in stone like Christianity was. Kind of like the old Olympic religions, they didn't really have like a Bible, so. Like with Greek cities, they would have different beliefs in what Zeus did from one city to another. They all had different creation stories. It's kind of similar with Woden worshippers, because like you might have Norwegians would believe this, whereas the Germanic people would believe something separate. But they were pre-literate for the most part, so not a lot of it was written down. So there's not a lot that's really known about their actual day-to-day beliefs and things like that. There's some things, but not a lot. Cyril and Methodius. So these two guys are going to be responsible for spreading Christianity throughout the Slavic kingdoms all the way to Russia, and also coming up with a form of writing known as Cyrillic, which is why Russian looks so weird today. They basically took the Greek alphabet and mixed it up a little bit to try to make more sense with Russian phonemes. That's a phoneme is a sound. The sounds that make up words, right? So, kind of like
Backwards already.
yeah, like whenever you, like a lot of you, if you learn phonetic way to spell, like when you're in kindergarten, first grade, you learn like the ah, ba sounds and stuff like that. You practice them and like the, and then you just put them together and make your words. Or some people also do live reading method. That one confuses me. All right, so I think that's it. Yep. All right, so let's go ahead. And let's get here. What did monasteries have? So, did they have ice cream and cookies?
No, they're like churches.
Yeah. So, of course, it was a religious institute. So, but it also fulfilled a lot of secular needs, as we'll see under stability. So, see, a church, always a church. So, and the church was there, of course, to hold dorms. Yeah. So. They most certainly were not co-ed. In fact, a lot of like nunneries usually accepted no men on the premise, and monasteries, a lot of them would not accept women on the premise because they didn't want to cause like irreligious troubles. All right, so what else would they have? It was self-sufficient. So they often had things to help them with daily life, right? Farms. Crickets. Yeah, gardens. And a farm is different from a garden because a garden usually is where you get your vegetables and spices from, where a farm is usually where you get your staple. I'm sorry, what else? Orchard. Yeah, so I need to do that right. So yeah, like for grapes and stuff like that. Yeah. They would often it would be a place to store wealth, so people would use them kind of like banks. They would often hold early schools, orphanages, and hospitals. And this is during a time when there was virtually nothing you would call a government. So the monasteries fulfilled a void for people when there was nothing else.
It was everything.
Yeah, the villages, often people back then were criticized for not allowing other people to know how to read and have books. Well, there wasn't a way for people to have those things back then, really, because they didn't even have the printing press, and there was hardly any education. It was so chaotic. So yeah, the villages were just basically places with huts and animals and wooden tools for the most part. So this was like the place that kind of kept somewhat civility. Because otherwise, the king was somewhere, but medieval kings were more or less just warlords. Most of them didn't do like things like help out the people around them. They kept their soldiers fed and ready to fight, and they entertained themselves, but they didn't really care too much about the peasants. So, the life of a monk. Of course, they didn't have a lot of power back then either. So, what was the life of a monk like?
Lonely.
Lonely. Yeah, we'll put solitary. I'm sure some of them were lonely. But the thing is, though, like a lot of things, it was still a club, So you're not necessarily alone. You're with other monks, so there's like a sense of brotherhood. I think, kind of like with you're have classmates, or if you're in the military or something like that. Yeah, very strict. So their life, whereas in the countryside, a lot of people's lives was more in tune with nature, but sometimes very chaotic. The life of a monk was like every part of the day was planned out what you're going to do. So they're going to see themselves as kind of like models for the rest of the world to be educated, spiritual, but also very productive, right? They're like, in fact, monks saw themselves as, in their words, as more manly than, say, like warriors, because they saw themselves as having self-control over everything, like whether it's like lust or like appetites for things like that. They're like, nope, we're in control. We can do whatever we need to. So strict. So what did they do during the day?
Pray.
Yeah, so they often in prayer, and that makes sense. A lot of them were priests and preachers and stuff, and missionaries. What else would they devote their day towards? Reading.
The Bible.
Yeah, so they read scriptures, but also now they had to read scriptures, but they could also read other books, like secular books, like ancient philosophy, stories and stuff like that. So they'd read Homer and things like that, right, for entertainment. So read scriptures. Anything else? And every day they did a lot of hard work. Yeah, a lot of hard work. So they saw this as their duty, because the whole idea is to lead an austere, simple life of self-sacrifice, where you didn't become a monk because you had like free food, you got to lay around all day. It was supposed to be hard work. So moving on from there, so we have one example of what's known as one of the people who went around converting the pagans, and that was Boniface. And what was he known for doing?
I don't know.
Yeah, so known for chopping down a sacred tree. Charlemagne's going to do this too later on. You say Odin or Woden worshippers, it didn't really matter. And what people did he convert?
The Norse. Or
No, the Norse aren't going to get converted till after Charlemagne. Yeah, yeah, I guess. Mini Celts. So you'd be part of that, and so yeah. So like I said, this is a big time when you have a lot of these altars were kicked over. Not all Odin worshippers did human sacrifice, but it was known to happen. Even Julius Caesar, when he went into Celtic lands, he would describe like he described what was it the Burning Man, where they would make like this big stick Burning Man, and they would tie criminals all up on this giant effigy, and then they would burn it as like a giant human sacrifice. So they are known for doing that kind of thing. So yeah, that would stink. Cyril and Methodius.
sent from Constantinople.
Yeah, right. So missionaries from Constantinople. And who are they going to like convert? I think we already talked about that. They're known as the patron of the wood.
Or,
It's an SL word. They convert some people, Slavic people. Yeah, so they're going to convert the Slavic people. Yeah, Eastern Europeans mostly, right? Going all the way up to Poland and into Russia. And provided a system of writing. I think I need to get a new green one. So we're seeing not just the religion spreading, but also civilization. Because the Romans never really bothered with pushing out that far or Romanizing a lot of these people. Though there were pockets of it in places like, I think like Dalmatia and Romania, but that was like the frontiers. And the same for like Britain. Britain was kind of like the frontier. There was some push for things such as currency and stuff like that going up there, but not that much. All right, so we talked about these things, and these monasteries would provide stability in Europe in what way?
They offered like homes for people who are lonely or
Yeah, so yeah, like travelers and stuff like that. So homes provided for the poor, orphans, widows, all that stuff, right? Also, what other services would they provide? What's something that they provided and we still have today?
they preserved classical literature.
Yeah, they had to do all this by hand. And see, that's why a lot of them raised sheep, because you needed little baby sheep to make what they used as paper back then called vellum. So they take little baby sheep, they take their skins off, tan them, and they make pieces of paper out of it.
Oh, that's
Yeah, it sounds sad, right?
Free land.
So those poor little lambs. Yeah, and like just one book in today's terms could be worth like tens of thousands of dollars because they would need to use so many skins. So this is very expensive. They really believed in what they did. So preserved ancient writing, ancient books. So yeah, they would spend their time in the evening by candlelight copying these manuscripts, and they would often illustrate them with like pictures and stuff like that. And yeah, a lot of them, of course, were theological works, of course, the Bible, but also pagan works as well, because they saw like the utility and the usefulness and the beauty in a lot of them. So ancient books, they also provided, of course, we already mentioned like education. They provided a safe place. This would be, since they had walls, this is where the peasants could go hide during raids. So especially before you had like princes or kings that could really like muster forth like an army to protect a lot of these people, they could at least hide behind the walls of the monastery until the barbarians went away.
They
Or-
converted people?
Yeah, that's another thing. So also spread Christianity. And now what this is going to do is, because you're going to have a homogeneous religion across Europe, it's going to end a lot of conflict between people based on that for a while. But with the rise of feudalism, you are going to see an increase in wars, because that's what feudal guys do. Knights get together with other knights, and they have little wars with one another. Now, what's funny about feudal warriors is like you're going to have a period where the small feudal wars are going to be kind of like the ancient Greek wars, where they get together, they beat each other up, but hardly anybody dies. It's like kind of, because, you know, they're like armored and their weapons aren't that effective against armor. But whenever they had the big wars, like we're going to talk about later, like with William the Conqueror, you're going to have like battlefields just full of vulture food, right? So we will get there. Okay, so that's your notes. All right, if you're an online person, I'm going to take a picture of this and provide this for you. So we're going to meet up again on Monday, and we'll go over the next couple of chapters. All right, have a good weekend.
What